Hi everybody, welcome back to Angie's Answers. Today I wanted to come and show you a quilt that I've got loaded on the frame. It's a little bit different than some of the traditional quilts that you will see. So this quilt does have an irregular shaped edge and it is an irregular shaped quilt. So it's a little bit different on how we put this on our frame. So you of course need to have your backing fabric that's going to be a rectangle. So you need to measure your quilt top and figure out what those widest dimensions are, and then make sure that your backing fabric is bigger than those wider dimensions. So you can see on here I've got this big triangle piece of extra batting and extra backing, and I have same thing over here, a big triangle piece of extra batting and extra backing. So you are going to waste a little bit more fabric than with the traditional quilt, but you just need to make sure that you've got that extra all the way around. So this is a diamond shape, trip around the world, all made from hexagons. So if you look at my edge here, it's got those points for those hexagons too. So this quilt, this one of our customers, she brought this in. It's a really old quilt. It is machine stitched, it's not hand stitched. So this is machine stitched, but it is a beautiful trip around the world made from hexagons, probably some vintage fabric. We're not quite sure what the year is, but she wanted us to quilt this so she could use it as a table topper. So she's going to be using this in her home, not going to hang it on a wall, but we figured because it's going to be a table topper, trying to stick with the traditional, I did use 100% cotton batting, and then I did pre-wash her backing too. So I pre-washed the batting and pre-washed the backing because we know that this is pretty vintage. These fabrics were probably washed, so we want everything to kind of shrink together. So I've got that all on here. I did start loading it onto the frame, so I loaded my backing fabric the normal way. I placed in the quilt top, or batting first and then the quilt top, and then I just tried to stitch as close as I could around the edge of those pointed pieces. So we do have somebody that works, not works at the shop, she helps us at our store. She is one of our renters, and she always offers, whenever there's unique projects like this, that she will help finish them. So that lady is going to be doing the binding on this quilt, and she said that she is able to put it on the machine on the one side, and then she will flip it over and hand stitch, and she is going to bind each one of those angles and each one of those corners. So what I wanted to show you was not only loading it on the frame, but how do you line up your pattern to stitch something like this that has that diagonal, that irregular shape. So when I'm in my Pro Stitcher, I did find the biggest dimensions of my quilt. So the widest dimensions of this are 69 inches from left to right, and then I've got 86 inches from top to bottom. So when I laid out my pattern, I purposely laid it out way bigger than what I'm going to need for this quilt, and I am going to crop it for each row. So what I have laid out on my screen, I have 96 inches wide and I have 96 inches top to bottom. So that's bigger than what I need both directions, but that's how I like to do this layout for an edge to edge, just to make sure that I have enough. Then what I'm gonna do is I'm going to place that pattern and match it up to my quilt. Let me turn you guys just a little bit so you can see this edge too. And you know what, let me turn those lights off so they're not so bright. There we go. So that helps you see this irregular shaped edge a little bit better. So as I basted, I started in this top edge and I just got as close as I could next to each one of those. I did it free motion. You could get a ruler out if you wanted to. You could also use your mark feature in Pro Stitcher and mark each one of those points. I would recommend slowing the speed down on the machine before you let it do that basting to stay as close to accurate as possible. I do have my glide foot on to make sure that I don't flip any of these edges over. I don't want to make it any harder for the lady that is helping us bind this. So now that I have plenty of pattern, I want to line up this pattern to this quilt. So you can kind of see right here, this pink edge, this is my widest edge that goes all the way down the side of the quilt. So these points, these are the widest. So what I want to do is I want to bring my machine over and I want to kind of eyeball where this wide edge is And that's where I want to set the right or the left hand edge of my pattern. So I've got my needle as close to me as it can be, and I'm looking at where these pink lines are, and I'm putting my needle about a 1/2 inch past where those points are. So that's going to make sure that I have plenty of pattern to that left hand side. Then I push my machine, let me turn you guys just a little bit more so you can see that. Push my machine all the way up away from me. And I know my top edge of my quilt is pretty close to where my zipper is up there. So that's gonna kind of set about where my top edge of my quilt is going to be. So now I want to take my pattern and move it to where my crosshairs are on the screen. So I go to the Modify tab, I choose Reposition, and then on this left-hand side, I'm gonna choose Top Left. So that takes the pattern and moves it to that top left corner for me. That's about where my top left corner is. But now what I need to do is I need to make it a little bit better. So I'm gonna take my machine, bring it back closer to me here, and I'm gonna start marking my area. So the way that I decided to do this area, I don't wanna waste all of this fabric here. I don't need it to quilt the pattern in all of this batting out here. So I am going to set up the pattern so it quilts along this angle here, but I'm not gonna come in and out of each one. So I'm gonna do my angle across this way. I need to make sure that I have plenty of pattern. I also need to mark an area. So I'm gonna bring my machine over and I'm gonna again try to find that widest spot where I wanna be. And I cushion it just a little bit. So I'm gonna stay at least 1/4 inch outside of all of these points, but you could even go a little bit more. You could give yourself a 1/2 inch. You can give yourself as much as you want to. If this is too hard and you wanna just let it stitch through here, you totally can. I just don't like to waste all that fabric and waste all that thread too, because they could cut this out and they could use those pieces for something later too. So I'm gonna bring my machine to my bottom left edge, and that's where I'm gonna start marking my area. So I turn on my area tab on the top, and because I'm on a Forte machine, I can use my diamond button, that's my multi-point, so I can use that to start marking my area. So I'm gonna start right here and put that first point in. Then I'm gonna come up to where this first highest point is of that hexagon, about 1/4 inch above it, and mark that one. And I'm just gonna stop at each one of those points and make sure that I'm at least 1/4 inch above where those points are. So I'm gonna do that all the way across this quilt. This just helps me make sure that I'm not going to come too far into the quilt or have any of those lines where I'm gonna close up the crop. Those cropping lines won't end up in the border of the quilt. That's all gonna be in that batting, but just a little bit outside. So I'm at the top edge of the quilt right now. So I'm just gonna come straight across that one and mark that. Then I'm gonna work my way down each one of these points down this side of the quilt. My cords are getting stuck. Give me 1 second. There we go. Can you guys see that edge? Let me bring you just a little bit over. There we go. Okay. So that is as far as I can reach, and I've marked my bottom left all the way around to that bottom right corner over there. Let me bring you guys over just a little bit so you can see my screen a little bit better. I know it's kind of hard to see, but see that pink line right in here, that triangle that's in there? That's our top left corner, or our top edge of the quilt. So if you look at my pattern, let me zoom in just a little bit more so you can see that better. Can you see right up here there's no pattern right there. And see how I'm really close to this edge of the pattern, but I have all this extra over here. So I want to move the pattern, so I'm putting more this way. So you can do that a few different ways. The way that I like to do it is under the modify in the reposition, and then I use this nudge, and I'm going to try to better center where my area is on the pattern itself. So now I've got plenty of extra pattern over here. I still have more pattern over here, and that's fine. I know I'm going to have enough pattern no matter where I am on the quilt. That's the most important. Then right up here, I don't want this hole to end up in my quilt. So I'm going to use this up arrow here and nudge that up until this first section is totally filled in. So now I can see that I have no gaps for this first section of the quilt. Now what I want to do is I do want to crop, but one step before I do that, I would like to save this entire layout just in case something happened. Then I for sure have this layout saved. So I'm going to come to my File tab. I'm going to go to Save and Selected. I have a folder here that I created that's called Quilt Layouts, and these are all previous quilts that I've already done. So I'm going to change this name. I'm going to clear this out, and this customer's name is Judith. So I'm going to type that in there, and that's how I like to save my patterns. You can save them however you want, but that's just how I like to do it. So what I've saved right now is just the pattern, the full layout. She did want, because this is an antique quilt, she did want me to do some pretty tight quilting. So let me hit our 1-to-1 button so you can see this is the scale of this pattern. The size that I laid this out, I laid it out to do 4 rows within my 16-inch throat space. So I'm going to be able to quilt across this 4 times before I have to roll it forward. So now what I'm ready to do, let me zoom in just a little bit more so you can see that better. I'm ready to get rid of everything that I don't want to quilt. So that's the Modify tab, the Crop option. I'm going to get rid of everything that's outside of that area that I just created, and I'm going to close up my edges. Anytime you do a crop, you also want a baseline to make sure that that pattern doesn't come back. In this scenario, I can leave my area opened. Normally when I do an edge to edge, I go back in and clear that area. But for this scenario, I do like to just leave it open because I am completely quilting this area before I do anything else. So it shows me along here, let me zoom in a little bit more so you can see that. This is my original starting point where my green circle is. I have another starting point here, so row 2, row 3, row 4, and then this is row 5. So once those rows are quilted, I'll be able to see a little bit better what I can reach and what I can't reach. I know for sure that I can reach those 3, probably that 4th one too, but maybe not that 5th one. But we'll know that more once more is quilted. So I'm ready to let this start quilting. I'm going to move over here. I'll bring you guys over a little bit too. I like to move a little bit closer to my starting point. You of course don't have to, but I like to. So I'm going to go to my Pro Stitcher tab. I'm going to tell it to go ahead and run this design. It'll move to my exact starting point, pulls away so I can get my bobbin thread up, and then I'm going to tell it to resume. It's going to take all my tacks, and then it'll start stitching just that first section. I'm not sure how much of the pattern is in this first section, but we'll let it go across, and I'll bring you guys in a little bit closer so you can see that too. So that's all it was for that first section. And remember, this is because we cropped it, it just needed that little bit. This pattern does have a pretty deep interlock, so it is gonna have to fill in a little bit. It'll look weird, but I promise it's doing it right. So I'm gonna pull away, get my bobbin thread up, do one more stitch, cut off all of those. And my long jump pause is on, which tells me that it's okay. I'm ready to resume because I know that I can reach another pass. So I can hold on to my thread here. I tell it to resume. It moves to the starting point, brings up my bobbin thread, comes back in tacks, and then it'll start working on this row. So let me bring you guys in a little bit closer. And then you can see how that is stitching across those edges and cropping wherever it needs to. You also, once it starts stitching like this, you want to make sure that you're watching your tension. So my tension looks good on the top, but you do always want to go underneath and check your tension too before it stitches too far. So as you can see, it's making its way down that edge in that batting and just making those straight lines out into the batting. So none of that cropping is going to show up on the quilt. It's going to be safely out into those batting edges. So it's done with that one. So I can go ahead and pull away, make a nice long tail, hold this thread, do one more stitch, and that pops up my bobbin thread. So I can cut all that off. I know I can reach another one. Bring you guys this way a little bit so you can see this edge. So I can go ahead and hit resume again. It'll move to that starting point, pulls up our bobbin thread for us. I can hit resume again, locks everything together for me. But watch what happens when it gets back to this edge. So there's my batting. It's going to make that straight line for me and connect everything together. So I am going to let this continue to stitch, continue to fill as far as I can. And then I will come back to you guys, bring you back in once this whole section is completed. First section, totally done. So I did all of those 4 rows as much as it could, cropped along our outside edges here, and it is waiting for me at the end of that last row. So same thing, I want to go ahead, bring up my bobbin thread, cut that loose. So this lady, I know that the customer or the lady that helps us out, I know that she is going to put the binding on. I'm not concerned about these threads out here. She is great, so I know that I don't have to worry about them. I kept it pretty close, so I know she's not going to go in and trim those away first. If I'm ever doing a quilt where I'm not sure how that customer is going to put the binding on, when I've finished a section of the quilt, sometimes I will take my machine and I will do one more stitching line with the machine along the outer edge of the quilt to help make sure that any of those threads that are going off into that batting area are going to be secured. If you don't do that and they cut off that extra batting and backing fabric and they cut through those threads and then say they don't put the binding on right away, those threads could pull apart and then you'd have a big mess to deal with. So it's just a kind of like a security blanket for me that if I'm not sure what's going to happen with the binding, whenever I finish stitching and there's threads that are in the batting, I will go one more time and I will just stitch right along that outer edge to help really secure those threads. So now I am ready to roll this section of the quilt out of my way. So I do have to take my clamps off. So I'm going to take all my side clamps off and then I'm going to roll it forward. Sorry, no, I'm in your way. I'm going to come down to the end of my frame. I'm going to lift up my roller bar for my backing fabric because there's nothing on my quilt top roller bar. I don't have to release the gear on that one. Then I'm going to start rolling about to there. So it's a little hard to see because this quilt is busy, but what I'm looking at is where my oh, you can't see that. Let me turn just a little bit. So I'm looking at where my previous row was and where my next row needs to fit in. And I want to keep the row that I just finished stitching about 2 or 3 inches away from that roller bar. I've got a little bit of a wrinkle in here, so I am going to lift up my top fabric roller bar, get that out of the way, and then I can kind of get my hand underneath of here to gently pull that wrinkle back out. I am trying really hard not to overstretch this quilt at all, so I'm trying to be really gentle with it, especially because of its age. So I just want to get in there and get this as smooth as possible. Okay, that looks pretty good. So I can set this bar back down. Now, because my machine is on that side, I'm going to baste that side first, but then I will bring the machine over and angle the camera a little bit better so you can see this side of the basting over here. I'm ready to start basting this side of the quilt. So I'm going to bring up my bobbin thread where I stopped basting that first section. Bring up my bobbin thread here. Use my star button to do a little tack, and then I'm going to start basting my way down this side. So I'm going to turn the machine on, and I'm going to try to stay out of your way so you can see how I'm basting coming down this side. So I'm just eyeballing where that edge is. I'm using my glide foot so I don't overstretch this fabric at all. And I'm just slowly working my way down this edge and basting as close as I can to that edge there. Stop and bring up my bobbin thread. Now that we're all basted around both our left and right edge of this section of the quilt, now I'm going to show you how we're going to line it up to quilt the next section of the quilt. So my Pro Stitcher screen still tells me that I'm on a long jump pause, so I need to cancel that. And as you can see, everything that is orange, this next row, I wouldn't have been able to totally quilt it. I would have hit my roller bar down here. So I quilted as many rows as possible. Now I need to reline everything back up so I can stitch that next section and of course not hit any roller bars. So the first thing I need to do is I need to get the rest of that pattern back. So I'm going to use my undo button up here, and I'm going to undo until I get the rest of the pattern back. I no longer need this pink area because that was for our first row. So I'm going to go to my area tab and I'm going to clear that out. Just because I brought the rest of my pattern back doesn't mean that anything shifted left or right or up or down yet. So I do have to do a drag and drop, just like you normally do when you're doing edge to edge, and line that up. But because I can't see this edge of my quilt right now, I need to move over just a little bit more so I can get to that next section of the quilt. Don't mind this, this is just my stand for my phone. It's not an alien. So what I'm looking at first, I'm going to look at the screen first, and I am going to find the stitching line for the last row that I just did. I know it looks a little confusing because there are a ton of rows on the screen, but this is one thing that I like to do when I'm stitching edge to edge. I will keep stitching the same rows over and over again. So I will purposely line up with the bottom of row 1, and I'll match that up every time I roll the quilt forward. So I'm restitching 2, 3, and 4 for this section of the quilt because I lined it up to stitch those 3 rows in that section. So I'm going to look at the screen and I'm going to get both of my crosshairs lined up along this bottom part for row number 1. It's right about there. And then I need to look at the quilt, and I'm going to do my drag and drop to match where my stitching is for that section of the quilt. So I'm going to turn my drag button on. I like to use my channel lock so I don't accidentally move the pattern left or right. And then I'm just going to move until my needle is directly above that same curve on the quilt, and then drop that in place. So now I've relined up my pattern on the screen. I matched it back up with where the quilt is. So I know now that I can safely quilt the next set of rows without hitting any roller bars. You can double check that though. So this is going to be the highest point for my next row that needs to match up inside of there. And then if I pull down, this is the lowest point. Oh, sorry, let me come over a little bit. This is a low point right here for the 4th row, and I'm not going to hit my roller bar. So just kind of a double check. So then the next thing that I need to do is I need to create another new area. So let me back you guys up just a little bit so you can see that area. So I've brought my machine over to my bottom left side. I'm looking at where these points are for these pink ones, and I'm going to stay about 1/4 of an inch past that point for each one. On my screen, I'm already in my area tab. so I can use my diamond button for my multi-point. So I always start at the bottom left edge and I'm going to work my way up. So I'm going to do a multi-point for each one of these. So I'm staying at least 1/4 of an inch beyond that higher point. And then I work my way back across this way to show myself where these are. Now this part's a little bit tricky. You have to make sure that you are pushing up as far as you can away from you and marking that point way above the space that you actually need. Because this pattern does interlock, if I accidentally stay down too low and mark across the top here, I'm going to cut off that top edge of the next row that needs to sew. So I've pushed as far back as I can this way, and now all I need to do is pull my machine straight across, and I'm staying as far back as I can until I get to where this edge is. Then I'm going to start marking my points coming down that side. Let me bring you guys over so you can see my screen a little bit better. And let me zoom out just a hair. I'm on pan, so I can slide that over a little bit. So now this is the area for our next row. Can you see my mistake though? So because I lined up with the bottom of row 1, it looks like I'm going to have a gap right here. But remember, that's part of row number 1, so that is already sewn, so I don't have to worry about that. Where some people would look at this and be like, oh no, there's a gap, it's going to be unquilted. But remember, that row is already stitched, so you don't have to worry about that. If I would have found the bottom of row number 4 and pushed all of that up, that's how you would have the extra rows above here. So it is total personal preference. Whenever I do a basic layout, so not a wrapped, whenever I do a basic layout, I will always line up with the bottom of row number 1 and stitch those rows over and over again. The reason why is I only had to move about this far to do my drag and drop to reline that back up. When you're doing all of the rows that you sewed and dragging all 4 of those out of the way, you're moving a lot farther and you take more of a risk of slightly shifting that pattern a little bit. So I found that if I do a basic layout, meaning that all of my rows are exactly the same, it doesn't matter which one I stitch because that pattern is exactly the same for every row. It's just important that I make sure that everything is lined up so my spacing stays consistent. So now that I've got this next area marked, now I'm going to crop and get rid of everything outside of this section of the quilt that I don't need. So that's the modify tab. My crop is turned on. I'm going to get rid of everything outside. I'm going to close up my edges and I'm going to do a baseline again. But I don't have to clear that area. That area is just fine. What I do need to do is make sure that I am starting on the correct starting point. So I know, because I lined up with the bottom of row 1, I know that this green circle is trying to restitch row number 1 again. I don't want that. That's already done. So I know that I need to jump it down 1 row. So I'm going to go to my Pro Stitcher tab, new start and end, and use my arrow down here to jump that down to the next starting point. Another really good way to double check if you're on the correct starting point, I know this is going to be hard to see, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my crosshairs so they're right on top of that green circle. So I'm going to get right on top of that green circle, and then I can look right down here below my needle, and there is not currently any stitching right there. Where if I move that back up, this is the starting point for row 1. And I know it's kind of hard to see, but there is already stitching right here. So I know that that's not correct because there's already stitching. So if I jump it back down to the starting point for row 2 and move my crosshair there, there's no stitching here. That's my double check to know for sure that I'm on the correct row and ready to stitch that next row. So all I need to do now is hold on to my tail of my thread here, go back to my quilt menu. So my run button is green. Run and proceed. It's going to bring up my bobbin thread for me, comes back and locks those threads in place. and then it'll start working on these next section of rows. So I'm gonna let it quilt this whole next section of those rows there, and then I can come back and I can show you that whole process again in the middle of the quilt. But all I'm doing is repeating that process over and over again. So I make sure I have my whole layout, all of my pattern laid out. I roll my quilt forward. I did my drag and drop to match what's on the screen to the stitching line on the quilt. And then I created my area by starting in the bottom left corner and making that area all the way around to the bottom right-hand corner. Crop the outside, close the edges, double check that your starting point is on the correct row, and then you're ready to let it stitch the next section. So I hope this is all making sense. Keep in mind that you can do this with any shape. So if you've got like a tree skirt or a funky shaped table runner, you can do this same process if it's a weird shape. So we always float the quilt top and stitch as close as we can along that edge of the quilt, and then keep our cropping of our design as close to that edge of the quilt as possible too. So we'll be back in just a little bit once this section is all done. Okay, the next section is totally done. So I'm going to bring up my bobbin thread over here. Take off my side clamps. One thing that I have learned that some people like to do when they're rolling their quilt forward is just get one of these straight pins, and then you can see where your stitching line is. You can stick that pin right in the stitching line for that previous row. Can you see that? There's my pin head right here. So stick that pin right in where that previous row is, where your next row needs to nest inside of, especially when it's an interlocking pattern, because that helps you see where you want this edge and how far to roll it from that roller bar up there. So let me turn you guys just a little bit. I'm gonna take off my clamps over here, and then I'm going to loosen my backing fabric roller bar and start rolling that forward. I'm watching the pin. I'm also watching the project. I hope you guys can see these wonderful little bubbles that we are getting here. I need to help work those out. So again, it's hard to do with this bar down. So I'm gonna lift up this bar here, and then I can kind of get my hand underneath and kind of fluff it a little bit, so I'm not pulling so much on that fabric. So I'm trying to just ease that in as best as possible. With antique quilts, it can be a little bit harder, but I want to try to ease that in and keep that as flat and as square as possible. Then I can keep rolling. You can roll with that bar up too. So I'm going to keep rolling a little bit more. I'm looking at where that pin is and putting that pin just a couple inches away from my white roller bar. So here's my pin right here. Here's my bar. So I've got just a couple inches between those two, and I can take that pin back out. This center looks like it's going to be a lot of fun. So there is a little bit of excess material in here, because if I'm looking where this is hanging, I can't really pull this down too much, or I'm just going to give myself a big bubble to deal with down here. So I'm going to try to ease this in. I've seen a few different methods for how people ease in. I've seen one lady that steams like right on the long arm, soup can method. There's a lot of different methods out there. One of the ways that sometimes I will help a quilt is you can cut some of the polyester batting. So we use the Hobbs poly down batting. So I could cut a piece of the poly down batting and stick that in the middle to kind of help take up where some of that excess is. But I'm going to try to quilt this without putting anything extra in there. So I'm just easing that up and making it as flat as I possibly can. And then I will deal with this next section when we get down to there for the next part of the quilt. So I'm going to set my roller bar back down. I'm going to baste my side edge again, and I'm just basting as close as I can, close to those edges. I'll baste both of those edges down, and then I'll come back and we'll go through the Pro Stitcher screen again on how we get rid of the current area that we just used, reline everything up, and make a new area. So we'll be back in just a second. All of my sides are basted. Now I'm ready to look at my screen again. So as you can see on my screen, it's telling me long jump pause. It finished those next 4 rows. I can't quilt the next one or I would hit where my roller bar is. So I'm ready to reline everything back up so I can stitch the next section. So first thing I need to do is cancel that long jump pause. Then I'm going to use my undo button, and I'm going to undo until I get the rest of that pattern back. I no longer need this area shape because we are done with that one. So I can go to area and clear that out. Now I need to line up my pattern. So I'm going to look on the screen. Let me bring it closer to you. So this is my first row right here. So I'm going to look for that part of that pointed leaf that's pointing down right here. I'll put my vertical crosshair on there. That one right there. And then I'm going to bring my horizontal crosshair up until it's matched up right on that same stitching point. So I find that stitching point on the screen first, and I get as close as I can to that. You can use your zoom tool and zoom in if you want to be able to see that a little bit better. So I am matching up along the bottom of the first row, and I can tell that it's my first row because there is unquilted space right there. So I found the lowest part of the bottom of the first row. I don't ever line up exactly with a point. I find the straightest line near the bottom edge as possible. So I'm sorry if that doesn't really make sense, but that's how I like to do it. Then if you look down at my quilt, it's nice because it's in this green, so you can see it pretty good. Here is that stitching line right there. So I only have to move about a ½ inch to reline everything back up. So I found the point on the screen. Now I want to bring this pattern on the screen and match it to right here where my quilt was. I know a lot of people, when they drag and drop, they like to leave their needle down, and when they're rolling their quilt forward, that's when they do that drag and drop. This is the way that I've learned to do it because I don't like to have my needle in the quilt when I'm rolling it forward. I do worry about it stretching a little bit. So I've learned that I can roll the quilt forward without a needle down, but I can still do that drag and drop and get everything lined back up. So I found my place on the screen. I'm going to turn my drag button on, and I turn my channel lock on so I don't accidentally move left or right. And if you watch the Pro Stitcher screen, as I move the machine, do you see how that pattern is moving with me? So that pattern is now locked to my needle. So now I need to put my needle right on this stitching line right here. So I bring my machine until my needle is directly above that same curve, that same stitching line. Then I'm going to do a drop and take my channel lock off. Let me zoom out just a little bit. Next thing I need to do is I need to mark the new area for this new section of our quilt. So I'm going to come over here, bring my machine here so I'm just past these wider points, and I'm going to come all the way down as far as I can, as close to me as I can. On my screen, I'm still in my area tab, so you could either reach up and touch your multi-point, or I'm spoiled, so I get to use my diamond button because I'm on my Forte machine. Then I'll move up to each one of these points and mark that area based on this section. And I go as far as I can, push all the way up, and mark one more point there. Then I'm going to take my machine all the way across to that side. Mark my highest point, so I'm pushing away from me all the way. And then I'll work on marking these points, staying at least 1/4 inch beyond each one of those points, and I'm pulling the machine as close to me as possible. Let me come on over so you guys can see this better. Okay, let me zoom out just a little bit so you can see that area that I just created. So that pink rectangle is my new section for the middle of this quilt. So now what I need to do is I need to get rid of everything outside of the area that we just created that I don't need to quilt. So I can go to modify. My crop is already turned on. I'm going to choose outside. I'm going to close up my edges. That way it won't take any of those extra starts and stops on the left and the right side. Makes it a little bit faster when it does the row. I always do a baseline after I crop. And then you can see my starting point again has jumped up to the starting point for row number 1. So I do have to go down. So I'm going to Pro Stitcher tab, new start and end, jump it down because I want it to stitch on row 2. The way that I can triple check that I'm on the correct spot is by moving my machine so my crosshairs are right on top of that green circle. And if I look below my needle, there is not currently any stitching there. So that's how I know for certain that I am starting on the correct row. If I jump it back up so it's on the starting point for row 1 and I come here, there is stitching right here. So that's my double check. So I'll jump it back down so it's starting on row 2. I did also check my bobbin thread and I did change my bobbin thread. This was just the first one, so I don't have to clean and oil yet, but I am on my second bobbin now. So I do have to be under the quilt menu. I can hit my run and proceed, bring up my bobbin thread here, resume, and I'm gonna let it quilt this next section. So I hope these steps are starting to make sense. I'm going to quilt the majority of the rest of this quilt so you can see how much I've got left to do. And I will come back and show you how we're going to do that bottom diamond edge of the quilt. All right, we have gotten down to the bottom of the quilt and I'm ready to baste this bottom edge and then show you how we line up the bottom edge of a project. So I'm going to start over here on my left-hand side, bring up my bobbin thread, and again, just work my way around as close as I can. Oh, sorry, you can't quite see that. Work my way around as close as I can to this edge. And I'm just trying to ease in as much of that fabric as possible. Let me bring you guys in just a little bit closer so you can see that. Whenever I am basting, I really like to use my glide foot because that hole in the glide foot is so small. So I'm keeping the edge of the fabric lined up right on the edge of the glide foot. And then I know that I'm for sure stitching less than 1/4 inch away from that edge. That way, when this binding gets put on, I know that my stitching line is going to get totally covered. So I use that edge of that glide foot for my guide, just to make sure I'm stitching less than 1/4 inch away. When I do my basting, I always use the same stitch length for my basting stitch as I do for the entire center of the project. So I personally don't change my stitch length for going on the edge or going in the middle of the project. I honestly find it's just a waste of time to bounce that stitch length back and forth. And especially because I'm stitching so close to that edge, I'm about 1/8 inch away from that edge, this is going to get totally hidden. So I don't really like to waste that time to go back and forth, but it is total personal preference. If you like to change to a bigger basting stitch, you totally can. It's not going to hurt anything. All right, totally basted. So I really hope that the lady that is helping putting the binding on, I really hope that that helps her for me doing this basting stitch to really secure all these layers together. Another helpful tip that I like to give is anytime I finish wherever I've stopped stitching and I bring up my bobbin thread at the end of my stitching and cut that bobbin tail, I go back and I search and I find where I started stitching and then I cut off those tails. That way I don't have all these extra tails all over on my quilt. So now let me bring you guys in a little bit closer. We're gonna look at the screen again and show you how we're gonna do this last part. Here's our screen. As you can see, it is still set on a long jump pause for the area that I did for the previous section of the quilt. So I do need to do a cancel here to get rid of that. And then I need to use my undo button a couple of times until I get back to the spot where I have all of that pattern again. I no longer need this area here, so I'm going to go to my area tab and clear that one out. I did have to roll the quilt a little bit too far, so I can't quite reach my next row. So I do have to back it off just a little bit. Oh my gosh, I forgot that all of that mess was up there. So don't look at that messy shelf back there. We're in the middle of quilt show season, and that is stuff that I need for quilt shows. So let me back this up just a little bit. I'm gonna lift up this pickup roller bar here and reverse this back so I can get to that previous row. I can reach that with my needle. So I'm just kind of double checking. I'm looking at where the highest part of my next row is going to sit, and I still need to come back just a little bit more. Okay. So I need to do a drag and drop again. So remember, I'm going to look at the screen. I'm looking at this is my first row. That's the lowest part of the first row. So I'm going to get my vertical crosshair lined up on that spot, and then I'm going to move the machine until my horizontal crosshair is also lined up right on that point. So I'm going to bring my machine back. You can use your zoom tool again if you want to zoom in to be able to see that a little bit better. So I want to get both of my crosshairs lined up right here on some part of that lowest point for the previous row, for the first row. Then I need to look below my needle. I can't quite see where the stitching is. So first I'm going to turn my drag on and my channel lock on, and I'm going to push the machine out of my way, and then I can find where that stitching point is. So now I want to bring my needle until it is right on top of that same stitching line on the screen. So I found a low point on the screen, and I did my drag and drop to match it back up to where that same stitching line is quilted on the quilt. Then I can drop this in place. Now I need to create my area again. So let me zoom out a little bit so we can see more of that pattern. For this instance, let's look at the quilt a little bit more. I am going to find the lowest point that I can in this bottom left edge. So this is the bottom edge as close as I can reach towards me. This is that farthest left-hand side for that bottom edge. So this is where I want to start creating my area. I have found that when I create areas, it works best if I do it in a clockwise motion. So that's why I always start at the bottom left, and then I'm going to work my way around this entire project. So I'm already under the area menu on my screen. So I could either touch that multi-point button, or because I have my forte, I get to use my diamond button on my handlebar. So this is my lowest point, so I'm going to push my diamond button there. Let me angle you guys just a little bit this way so you can see more of this edge. And then I just start working my way for each one of these points. So I'm putting my needle at the farthest out point, and I'm using that diamond button right there. I'm going to try not to be in your way, but I think I'm going to be in your way no matter what. So I like to find each one because I feel like that's the most accurate area that I can possibly create. Instead of just kind of guessing and hoping that that line is staying even, I like to put my needle on each one. Now I'm going to come up that side. So I'm going to find this is my widest out point here. You know what? I need to put my clamps on. Sorry, I forgot to do that after I basted. There's my wide point there. Then I'm going to push all the way up as far as I can away from me. And now we're going to go across the quilt this way. And we're going to work down that side. Here's my widest spot here. Then I need these clamps on too. And then I can start marking each one of these points coming down this angle. So if you can imagine that you have a Christmas tree skirt, a round shape, you're going to be doing the same thing. You're just finding the outer spot and as far as you can, and you're always working from the bottom left in a clockwise motion. Let me zoom out a little bit more. put my pan on so you can see that is the new area that I've created. So now I need to get rid of all of the pattern that I don't need. So I go to my Modify tab, I'm on Crop, I'm going to get rid of everything outside, I'm going to close up my edges, and then I'm going to baseline. Oh, sorry, you couldn't see the baseline. Mine's over here on the left-hand side. And the way that I know that baseline work is because it's grayed out. So remember, anytime you do this crop, your start is automatically going to jump back to the first row. So this is another reason when I'm working on a project like this, that I always line up with the bottom of row 1, because now all I have to do is move my starting point down to row number 2. If you were quilting every single row of this quilt, think about how many times you would have to jump that starting point down if you lined up with the bottom of the 4 sections of rows each time and drug those out of the way. Did your drag and drop to get those out of the way. So I think I have rolled this quilt 5 times. So that means if I'm doing 4 rows across in one section, and I've rolled it 5 times, when I get down towards this bottom, that means that when I come to my Pro Stitcher and new start and end, that would mean that I would have to use this arrow here for my jump down. I would have to use that 20 times to get down all of those 20 rows out of my way. So this is just a little bit of an easier way for me to do the drag and drop and not have to do so much work by only having to jump down 1 row. Because remember, row number 2 is exactly the same as row 3, row 4, row 20. They're all the same when you're doing a basic layout. If you're doing a layout that is a wrapped layout, then they're not the same. So if I would have done a pattern that I wrapped, then I would have had to quilt each row for the correct row on the quilt, and I would have to jump that start down even farther. So total personal preference. I hope this gives you a good idea on a different way to do a drag and drop, and I hope that it makes sense. If it doesn't, please reach out to us. You can email us at quiltingconnectionwi@yahoo.com. You can also comment on this video. I'll try to keep up and watch the comments too. So remember my for sure way to make sure that I'm in the right spot. Let me bring you guys over this way a little bit. I bring my machine until my crosshairs are exactly on top of that starting point. And if I look below my needle, there is not any stitching underneath of there. So that's how I know that I'm at the right spot. I can go to my quilt tab. I can hit my run and proceed after I hold my thread. Bring up my bobbin thread, hit my resume. And then I'll let this work on this next row. So I'm gonna let it quilt these next sections of these rows here. And then I do need to do one more advance to be able to get to that last part. So I'll come back and show you one more video of that final crop for the last section of the quilt. Those last few rows finished. Now I've just got a little bit left, but I can't quite reach that bottom edge. So I'm gonna roll it forward just enough to reach that. So I'll lift up my backing fabric roller bar, roll that up just so I can reach it. Because I rolled the machine, I have to do another drag and drop. So I'm going to cancel on the screen, do those steps that I did before. Let me see if I bring it over. That'll be good. So I'm going to do my undo button until I get the rest of that pattern back. Then I'm going to clear out my area. And now I can do my drag and drop. So on the screen, I'm going to find that lowest part of row number 1. You can use your zoom to make sure that you're right on top of there. Then I'm going to do my drag and my vertical. This time, because I didn't roll it as far, I actually need to drag the pattern towards me instead of pushing it away from me. And I do need to move it a little bit more because I didn't roll the quilt as far. So the distance that you have to drag and drop is also in relation to how far you move the quilt. So because I only move the quilt a little bit, I have to drag it a little bit. So I'm going to bring the machine down towards me until that same stitching line on the screen is matched up with that stitching line on the quilt. And then I can drop it in place and take my channel lock off. Let me zoom out I'm going to mark my area so you can see that from a little bit farther of a distance away. So this time, because I can reach all of this, I'm gonna start over here on this left-hand edge. But this is where it gets a little bit trickier. This is why I wanted to make sure to show you the bottom part. So normally I would start as far down as I can on my left-hand edge, but because I can reach all of this, this is technically my left side that I need to mark first. So I'm going to start clockwise. So this time I'm going to start on the top left side. But what you have to make sure with an interlocking pattern is that you find the spot that's above where that next row needs to stitch, so you don't accidentally like crop off part of that row that you want to stitch. So I have to look at my quilt, and this is where my next row needs to fit, is right inside of here. So I'm going to bring my machine above that, so that way I'm creating that area above there and not losing part of that point. Then I'll come back over to my left-hand side here and start marking where that area is. So I'm already on my area screen, so I can just use my diamond button. And I am setting that top of my area first, all the way across. Then I can work my way around and set where each one of these points are. So I'm still working in a clockwise motion from left to right. Okay, let me bring you over this way so you can see the screen a little better. Here's that area that I created. So I need to get rid of everything on the outside that I don't need. So that's a modify tab. My crop is already turned on. So I can go to the outside, close up my edges, and then do a baseline. Remember, your start jumps for your first row, so I don't want it to re-quilt that first row. I want it to come down and quilt the next row. So I have to go Pro Stitcher, new start and end, jump down. But if we look here, so if I move my crosshair to that starting point for row number 2, there, I believe, is already quilting there. Let me double check. Where's my starting point for row number 3 is all the way down here. There is not any quilting there, but let me check here too. So one of the easiest ways to see which row you need to stitch is, can you see on my screen, I'm lined up with a stitching line. And if you look below my needle, there is already a stitching line there. So I don't want it to quilt row number 2. I actually need it to start on row number 3 this time. So I'm going to go to my new start and end, jump it down another one. So now it's going to start here and there is no stitching below my needle. That's why it's super important to double check which row you actually need stitched. Because this is the bottom of my quilt, it's a little bit different than all of the other rows that we've done too. So I'm going to hold on to my thread here, touch my quilt menu so that way my run button turns green, run and proceed. It's going to bring up my bobbin thread for me, resume, and it'll start working on this bottom edge of our quilt. I'm going to just let this run so that way you guys can see this if you want to. I think I was wrong. Let's see where this goes. But I think I do need it to go up and stitch row number 2. So see how I don't have anything filled in right here? I think I do need it to do that one, but that's okay because I can always do Pro Stitcher start and end and then jump that back up and I can fill in that row. See, I make mistakes too, totally fine, but definitely fixable because I haven't dragged or dropped or changed anything else. All I need to do is jump my start back to row number 2 and then let it stitch row number 2, and then all of this empty space will get filled in. But just to be safe, I feel better that I did skip that row so I could see exactly where this one was lining up, and I can always go back in and put that last one in. And then you can see right in here, this is all that's going to need to get filled in for the final row of this quilt. So we'll let this one finish up. Then I'll move my starting point back up and do that row that's missing right now. Then I'll move my starting point all the way down and we'll finish up this last little bit of the quilt. So feel free to fast forward this part if you want to. Oh, no, I lied. Don't do that because it just stopped this row. So I can pull away and get my bobbin thread up. And then let me bring you guys back over here a little bit. So on my screen, I need to cancel the long jump pause. I need to go to Pro Stitcher tab, new start and end, and then I need to use the up arrow here to take my starting point back. I thought that was weird that it wouldn't need row 2, but it does need row 2. So I was wrong. So we'll let it do that. So I'm going to hold on to my tail of my thread. It's going to start up here. Turn my quilt menu on so my run button is green. Let it bring up that bobbin thread right there. Resume to lock that together. So that stitching line that I was looking at, sorry, let me bring you over a little bit. That stitching line that I was looking at on the screen, that long one, that's actually part of row 1. That's why I was confused. So this is part of row 1. That's why there was stitching there. You can see what's turning orange is what's currently part of row number 2. So that's why it is correct. And that's how it is filling in that open space between these rows right now. So I'll let this run across and finish up this row here. Feel free to fast forward if you want to, and then I'll show you how I'm just gonna finish up this last little part too. Okay, so it is done with that one. I can go ahead and pull away, get my bobbin thread up. And now I just need to change my starting point to do that last row. So let's look on our screen again. I'm going to cancel the long jump pause. I'm going to go to Pro Stitcher tab, new start and end, and now I need to jump it down 2. So it's on this starting point right here. Remember, if I get my crosshairs, sorry, let me move you over a little bit. Get my crosshairs lined up right on that starting point there. And if you look below the needle, there is not currently any stitching there. So that's my double check to make sure that I'm on the right one. I'll hold on to my tail of my thread, go to my quilt menu, hit run and proceed. Brings up our bobbin thread for us. Hit resume. It'll lock our threads together. And we'll let it close up just this last little bit. It does look like on my screen there might be one more starting point in there, so we'll see what happens when it gets to the end of this, but I don't think there's anything else that needs to get stitched in there. But you never know. So it finished up that one. Let's see what our screen says. It does say long jump pause, so there is just one more little stitching part. I'm not sure where it's gonna go, but let's find out together. So we'll bring the machine over. I'm gonna hit my resume button. It'll move to that starting point. Brought up my bobbin thread. Let me move down just a little bit. Hit my resume again. Locks our threads together. Oh, it just wanted to do a few little tacks in the batting for me. That was silly. So let me pull away again, bring up my bobbin thread, and cut all that off. So I hope that you can see, if you look along this edge here in my batting, see how all this straight line here is off of the edges of the quilt. And I didn't have to waste the time to come in and mark each one of these. I don't feel bad wasting just that little bit of batting and backing, because look at how much I saved her. I didn't waste all of this batting and backing over here by allowing the machine to stitch across the entire quilt. So she's gonna have some good pieces of batting and backing fabric left to go. Let me take this off the frame and then I'll show you what the entire project looks like. Here's our entire project off of the frame. So you can see that table topper that's gonna come to this diamond. This is gonna be gorgeous on her table. I'm really jealous. So one of the last couple things that I wanted to talk to you about is our zipper system. So I know some of you have seen it, some of you love it, which is great. We appreciate that. The zipper system is how we load on our frame. I always leave my zippers on a project when I take it off the machine, because this is my chance to check everything over. Say that my thread messed up in that bobbin and I had like a weird knot somewhere. This gives me the opportunity to zip it back on my frame and to fix that area without constantly having to pin, unpin, repin it back on the frame, unpin it again. So I can't stress how much we love the zipper system. I've got a few other videos about our zipper system. If you have any questions though, you can find it on our website, which is longarmconnection.com. Or again, you can email us, is quiltingconnectionwi@yahoo.com. Or you can also call us too, is 262-723-6775. But the zipper system has saved my life more times than I can count. So I get to pin this away from the frame. I get to check everything over. If I did need to put it back on, I could just zip it back on real quick. So the last thing that I do before I give this back to the customer is I will flip it over and I will check my entire backing fabric and make sure everything looks good here. I will lint roll it and make sure that it's nice and clean. And then I do usually trim the quilts for the customer. So for this lady, I'm just going to trim just past where the stitching line is here, just to make it a little bit easier for our friend to put the binding on. But I hope you've enjoyed learning how to do a quilt like this with an odd shape and not wasting all of this extra batting and backing fabric and thread too. So if you do have any questions about this, just let us know. You can do this with any shape, like we talked about, a Christmas tree skirt or a placemat, anything like that. So I hope this has helped. But again, if you do have any questions, just reach out to us. And of course, enjoy your day and happy quilting. Thanks so much. Until next time.